The world of Moomin, his original name is Moomintroll, was created by a Finnish writer and artist, Tove Jansson. She wrote a series of Moomintroll books. Her first book, The Little Trolls and the Big Flood, was published in 1945, right after World War II. At first, it was only sold at newsstands in Finland, but after a while the character started to appeal to many Finnish people, and over the next 26 years, Tove wrote the stories and drew the illustrations for 8 more Moomintroll books. The unusual name, Moomintroll, was made up by Tove's uncle. He used to scare her by saying that an invisible creature called Moomintroll lurked behind a stove in the house. When she did something bad, he would tell her, "Moomintroll will come out." Moomintroll's shape came from a character Tove scribbled on a wall when she was a little girl. It was a plump creature with a large nose and a long tail. Tove kept drawing this character as she grew up. In her 20s, the war began. During the war, Tove was working on cover illustrations for a magazine which was speaking out against the war, so the Finnish government censored her works. She lost her motivation to draw. "I felt that painting did not mean anything when this world was in chaos," she said. Colors were fading away from everything around us. Feeling discouraged by the world around her, Tove started to make up a new world of her imagination. She remembered the happy days of her childhood and tried to find a place with a feeling of calm and peace. This place was Moomin Valley, a green valley inhabited by a creature named Moomintroll and his friends. To tell the truth, writing such a story during the war was a kind of escape from reality for me, said Tove. Now listen to part 3. Tove's imaginary world reflected the beautiful nature of her country, a land filled with endless green forests and blue lakes. Moomin Valley has short summers and long winters, as in Northern Europe. At the end of autumn, Moomintroll and his family eat a full meal of pine needles before they hibernate for the winter. Life in the valley is full of ups and downs. Sometimes it is threatened by floods, tornadoes, and volcanic eruptions. The characters in the stories must deal with not only natural threats, but also their difficult personal problems. This makes the Moomintroll series different from other children's stories. One episode goes like this. A young girl named Ninny loses self-confidence because her aunt is always mean to her. She feels so bad that she turns into an invisible person. Fortunately for her, she has a chance to meet Moomintroll's family. They welcome her and treat her kindly. Touched by their kindness, she gradually becomes visible again, although it takes a little longer to get her face back. Little Me, Moomintroll's tiny but tough friend, says to her, "You'll never have a face of your own until you've learned to fight." In order to get her face back, Ninny needs to gain self-confidence. One day, Moomin Papa tries to push Moomin Mama into the sea just for fun. The girl thinks he is trying to hurt Moomin Mama. She gets angry and stops Moomin Papa by biting his tail. It is at this very moment that her face starts to reappear. By saving her dear Moomin Mama, Ninny, who up until this time has never shown the will to stand up to anyone, is able to get her face back. Ninny standing up to Moomin Papa leads to her self-confidence. Now listen to part 4. As this episode shows, Tove addressed human problems through her fantasy stories. If you step into the world of Moomintroll, you will find that the residents of Moomin Valley have the same kinds of problems you are facing in your own life. So readers can learn lessons about life from the characters and stories while enjoying them at the same time. The form of a fantasy makes it possible for different people to find their own personal messages in her stories. Tove said that she wanted to escape from reality by creating the world of Moomintroll. But in fact, she was not running away from reality. Instead, she was dealing with it creatively, and by doing so, she has brought joy to many children throughout the world. It makes me feel so happy to see children finding themselves in my fantasy world and treasuring my stories, said Tove. Translated into more than 35 languages, the stories of Moomin Valley have enchanted the hearts of people all over the world. The world of Moomin Troll continues to entertain and light the way for people in times of hardship as well as in times of joy.
Now, listen to part 1. When Mary Lou came home from school, she found her father doing something new. With a big sheet of paper on the table, he was drawing lines on it with a ruler and a pencil. "What are you doing?" she asked. "I am going to build something." Her father's response called for another question. "A playhouse?" Mary Lou always wanted to have a playhouse, and since her father was a carpenter, it would not be hard for him to make one for her. "I am going to build a room onto our house." Her father now started to reveal the answer. "Your grandfather is coming to live with us." Mary Lou got so excited at the news that she went upstairs to find her mother. She was sitting in the rocking chair, holding Timmy, Mary Lou's baby brother. "Mother, Grandfather is coming to live with us. Isn't that wonderful?" "I hope he will be happy here," her mother said in a soft voice. "Why wouldn't he be happy?" Mary Lou asked. "Well, it's just that he's very old," her mother said. Now, listen to part 2. A few months later, Grandfather came to live with the family. Mary Lou felt somewhat happier than ever before, but she could not tell exactly why. Sometimes Grandfather was quite a lot of trouble. When he had pains in his bones, he could not walk very well. There were even days when he had to stay in bed, and then Mary Lou's mother had to take his meals into his room. Sometimes he spilled things on his clothes, which added to her workload. Still, there were other days when Grandfather's legs felt well enough to take him out for a walk with Mary Lou. On one of those days, Mary Lou asked, "Don't you feel sorry that you can't run?" "Oh, no," said Grandfather. "When I was your age, I ran everywhere I went. I had my turn at running. Now it's your turn. When you're old like me, it will be other children's turns." Mary Lou stopped walking. It was a bit frightening for her to imagine herself too old to run around. "You won't mind," Grandfather said. "Years go by just as day and night slip along. And you hardly notice it, do you?" "No," Mary Lou said solemnly. "And then you die, Grandfather?" "Well, yes and no," Grandfather said. While they were walking, they came to the edge of a field where there was a big beech tree whose top was withering. Mary Lou knew it well because in summer the children in the neighborhood would play in its shade. "Look at the old beech," Grandfather said, pointing at it with his cane. "What do you see, Mary Lou?" "An old tree, plus some little trees growing around it." "Right. Do you know where those little ones come from?" Then Grandfather answered this question. "They come from the beech. That old tree knows its time is about over. So it tells its roots to make little new trees. At first, the new trees get water from the old tree's roots. Later, they start to make roots of their own. By the time the old tree dies, they don't need it anymore. Still, if it hadn't been for the old tree, they wouldn't be alive. The old tree keeps on living in them." Mary Lou found it a little hard to take all this in, but she felt like asking a question. "Do you like young ones, Grandfather?" Grandfather didn't say anything, but there was a broad smile on his face. Now, listen to part 3. That night, a strange conversation between her mother and father happened to find its way through the open windows to Mary Lou's ears. "Donald," her mother said, "I think we should consider putting your father into a nursing home. I don't think it's good for our children to have an old person in the house. He is failing, and it will make them sad." Her father said in a strange voice, "I understand how you feel, Marian, and so I can't go against your ideas. Honestly, I know he's quite a burden on you." Mary Lou could not believe it. How could they believe Grandfather would make her sad? Tears came into her eyes before she knew it. But she couldn't stop thinking. Maybe Mother was tired of taking care of him. If so, then... Mary Lou heard herself thinking aloud, "I must do something about it." Then suddenly she got up, went out of her room, and tiptoed to Grandfather's room. "I don't want you to go, Grandfather," she said abruptly. "I've made up my mind to do everything for you, like washing your clothes when you spill something on them." Grandfather was astonished to hear this. However, sorting out words and scenes from the past few days, he managed to grasp the whole picture. "It is sweet of you, Mary Lou, to plan to help me that much," Grandfather said. "But I must admit, it might be a better idea, for an old person to go somewhere else, which might be more suitable for him. That'll save you and your mother lots of trouble." "But the little trees are living with the old beech," Mary Lou talked back. "They don't send it away." "Hush, my dear," he said. "Trees are not humans." Hearing this, Mary Lou started to sob. Now she was kneeling by Grandfather's bed, and he stroked her hair. After a while, he said, "Don't you worry about me. I'll be away from you, but you can always come and see me." "You will not go! I won't let you!" Mary Lou insisted. "Thank you, dear child, for wanting me to stay," Grandfather said. "It's so sweet of you. It's getting very late, though. You have to get back to sleep. Good night, Mary Lou."
Now, listen to part 1. On February 23, 2003, a plane from Hong Kong was about to land in Hanoi. One of the passengers, a Chinese-American businessman, was feeling a slight fever. Nobody knew that within him a virus yet unknown to the world was running wild. In fact, this businessman was to throw all of Vietnam into chaos, setting off the outbreak of an epidemic disease called SARS. The plane landed in Hanoi, and the businessman disappeared into the city. Dr. Carlo Urbani was born in a small town in Italy. While working in a hospital in the town, Urbani often went to Africa as a member of Médecins Sans Frontières, MSF, through which he gave needy children medical care. Cheerful and friendly, he was popular with patients and people around him. In 2000, Urbani, with his wife and their 3 children, went to Vietnam as an epidemic disease expert from WHO. Now, listen to part 2. It was around noon on March 3, 2003, that Urbani received a call from the Hanoi French hospital. A doctor asked for Urbani's help, saying, "A tourist from Hong Kong is now in serious condition. We don't know what's wrong with him. We would appreciate it if you could come and see him." Urbani hurried over and saw that the patient was having difficulty breathing. The man was running a high fever, close to 40 degrees, and his face, arms, and legs were purple. He kept coughing in pain for over 30 minutes. This was the beginning of Urbani's struggle with the disease. Despite all of his examinations, he could not discover the cause of the disease. "This is not what we know as the flu," said Urbani. "We have to find out what it is." Urbani wondered if the patient had met with people from Guangdong, China. He had heard that people there were in a panic because of the outbreak of a mysterious pneumonia. But nobody was sure if the patient had been close to any infected people. All Urbani and his colleagues could do was to watch the spread of the disease and report it by email to WHO. Now, listen to Part 3. On March 5th, a nurse taking care of the patient collapsed. With a terrible headache and pain in her muscles, she became unable to move. Later, another nurse fell while working, showing similar symptoms. Soon, more nurses started complaining of being sick. Urbani and his colleagues did their best to keep the disease from spreading, but their efforts were completely ineffective. By March 8th, those on the hospital staff struck by the illness numbered 17. The isolation ward of the hospital was full of groans from those suffering from pain and high fevers. There was little the hospital could do, as there were hardly any doctors or nurses not infected. Also, there was neither medical equipment nor effective medicine to treat them. Urbani recorded what he had found, had samples tested, and tried to work out a means to stop the disease. He wrote down the details of the symptoms the patients showed. Day after day, he kept emailing the data to the people at WHO, asking them to let the world know what was happening in the hospital. Urbani also asked WHO to send supplies and people to help him and his staff. Concerned about the negative impact on tourism, however, the Vietnamese government was reluctant to cooperate with WHO and Urbani. Urbani's request was turned down. Now, listen to Part 4. The hospital put the patients in an isolation ward, and nobody but the staff could enter it. Urbani never stopped visiting the patients. He sat by their beds and tried to give them hope. "We have no effective medicine against this virus yet. But no virus lives forever. It will die in a while," said Urbani. "I'll always be with you, so try to be strong." One of his patients recalled, "The world gave up on us, but Dr. Urbani didn't. He gave us great encouragement." Yet Urbani had no idea what was happening to his body at that time. The virus was growing fast inside him as well. On March 11th, the WHO specialist in infectious diseases who Urbani had been waiting for arrived in Hanoi. The specialist, Dr. Oshitani, was Urbani's boss. Having shown him around the hospital, Urbani abruptly asked him, "If you had this disease, what would you do?" Oshitani answered, "I guess the best thing to do is to get out of Hanoi and go somewhere where you can get proper treatment. But as a doctor, I believe the right thing to do is not to let the disease spread. I would stay where I am." He continued, "But as a man with a family, well, I'm not sure." That same night, Urbani quietly left Hanoi for Bangkok. where he put himself under medical care at a hospital specializing in epidemic diseases. He was now a patient himself.